Welcome to In Conversation With. This is the first of what I hope will turn out to be a long series where I talk with people from all over the world, and of course I'm starting with people that I know and my friends, if you like. My first guest this week is Mr. Paul Omani. Paul, you are very welcome to In Conversation With.
Oh, Moira, it's an absolute honor to be the first.
Well, someone had to be the first. Now, Paul, this is an open conversation. It's as wide or as narrow as you want to make it. There are no holes barred and nothing is off the table. And if that resonates with Oprah Winfrey, I do apologize. Paul, tell me something about yourself, where you come from, what's your background?
Okay, the most important thing, fundamental, foundation thing about me to know is that I'm the eldest of 6 children. And that means I started off my life as a failure. I failed to satisfy my mother and father, and they went on to have 5 other children. So that's the first thing. But, firstborn children have an opportunity to be some sort of leader. But my mother kept control of that because she never let me have any authority over the others. We were all equal. And even though I was older, wiser, more mature, more responsible, I was never allowed to tell them what to do. So there's one fundamental thing about me. Now, do you want me to go on at length about myself, or would you as an interviewer like to chip in after I've done a paragraph?
Well, let's see how it goes. I'm quite happy to chip in and ask questions if something arises that I find particularly enthralling or interesting that I want you to develop. But for the moment, let's just take a brief version of your history. Now, I know that you were born in Limerick and that you spent a lot of your working life in the UK.
Oh, right. There's a heck of a lot left out there. Let me just tell you, important to know that I dropped a whiskey bottle at the age of 2 on the ground. You can imagine the smell in the house. But I discovered that there was another adult who loved me because she didn't scold me. And one of the key things I've learned is that in order to emerge a reasonably balanced individual in the rest of your life, you only need to be loved by one person. And indeed, I would have said most of my life, and I still would say today, that I experienced more immediate love from that person who was not my mother or father. And this is not to be critical of my mother and father, but just she was expressive and she gave hugs, and my mother never gave hugs. And my father never gave hugs. So back to the quick fast forward after that, the next most significant thing I could probably say is that I went to kindergarten with Bill Whelan, the composer of Riverdance.
Okay.
So rather than sort of get, whatever it's called, reflected glory based on the fact that I was at his first violin lesson outside the room, and he was bloody awful. Thank goodness he never got into violin. He was an organ player, a piano player, a guitarist, and a drummer. But leave all that out. I was educated by Jesuits. This was a seriously good thing because the Christian Brothers were down the road beating hell out of the kids, and that was the alternative school. And they were, now I didn't say this, but I've spoken to people who said they were savages. That's obviously a travesty, and there must have been one kind, decent Christian brother who, so there's totally wrong to scapegoat the whole lot, but they were brutes. And we were only beaten with leather pandy bat.
Mm-hmm.
And apart from one person, I think, we were never had our trousers pulled down and beaten on the backside. That never happened to me. But basically, I grew up in the company of Jesuits, most of whom were poor teachers. I wasn't at all impressed with the teachers I had at school, except for one wonderful man, Owen O'Leary. Not Owen O'Leary, he's one of my best friends. Owen O'Moore, a man to whom many people owe things, so I pay tribute to him. May he rest in peace. But he was my English teacher for, I'm sure, 2 years. And he had a technique. Oh, I've never told anyone this except the people who were in the classroom. But he had a way of talking about Shakespeare. You know, we're talking about Miranda and Prospero in The Tempest. And as you would know, Paul, Miranda's language in the second act is this. And Paul hasn't a blooming clue, barely knows who Miranda is. But he said, as O'Mahony would know. And he did this to other people, so it wasn't just me. The last thing I should say before I get to Dublin is that my grandfather set up a bookshop in 1902 in the main street in Limerick, and it's still there today, owned by one of my brothers. So one significant decision on my part was to say, no, thank you, I won't work in the bookshop. I won't inherit the bookshop. I want to go and do my own thing. So there I was, a guy who wanted to get out of Limerick. Have we got 7 hours for this podcast, Moira? Anyway, I got out of Limerick. I went to Dublin. I hadn't a clue what I wanted to do for a job. I did a degree in social science. I hadn't a clue what I was going to do. So I decided, oh, sod it, I can't think of anything else to do. I'll do a master's by major thesis. I'll become an academic, although I didn't want to be an academic. But I had the communication talent and the interest in doing research. So I thought, God, I'd be pretty good at this stuff, really, if I wanted to be. But I wasn't. I applied for one job as a research assistant, didn't get it. Some woman called Louise got it. Wish I could remember her surname, but anyway, she got it. I didn't. I did this master's by thesis, which meant that I had hardly any contact with the university. I had this kind of hippie supervisor who let me get away with doing this master's for about 5 years. Now, and I never finished it. Now, it would be remiss of me not to say that during this time, I did not spend my time sitting around writing poetry in pubs or smoking marijuana or dropping tabs of LSD. Didn't do any of that. But what I did do was I was politically active in an organization which was left-wing. And the biggest, most memorable thing I've done was be with a group of people who broke into would be the wrong word, and we would never have said we did that in court. We walked into the Department of External Affairs on Stephen's Green and chained ourselves to the railing inside, protesting in favour of the removal of Articles 2 and 3 of the Constitution of the Republic of Ireland. A noble cause. We got to be #1 item on the 1 o'clock news. And in a referendum in about 80 something, Articles 2 and 3 were removed from the Southern Irish Constitution. And by the way, Articles 2 and 3 were the articles of the Constitution that laid claim to jurisdiction over Northern Ireland. So, having been an academic then, because I did a degree and then didn't finish a degree, and in the meanwhile became a lecturer, part-time lecturer in sociology and sociological theory and research methods in the Institute of Public Administration, teaching, if you like, high-flying civil servants how to use sociological theory, which is all about being clear what literature is out there, but also how you're going to formulate hypotheses within a conceptual framework relating to theory, and teaching people to do research. I decided to drop out. I went to London, never finished the thesis, became a bus conductor, and the rest is history.
Now, the thought of an Irishman coming from academia and going to London and becoming a bus conductor is just so, I can't think of the word, unusual, let's say. How did you see that transition?
Simple. First of all, I only went for the summer. Secondly, I had friends who had gone to London and got jobs on the buses and got jobs in other places as well, summer jobs. And I knew people who'd gone and stayed. I wasn't a waif astray abroad in London. I knew people already, and I'd been there before. So I didn't intend to stay, but I got into, okay, you said no holds barred. I got into opera and sex in London, and food, opera, sex and food in London in the summer of 75. Was it 70? Yeah, it was. And opera was a big factor, huge. The first opera I ever went to was Samson and Delilah. It was the only opera I ever saw in Ireland. There's loads of sex in that. Absolutely. Oh my goodness, it oozes. Anyway, I said to myself, God, I never thought I'd like opera, but if it's going to be this erotic, I'm definitely going for it. So I go to London, I go to the English National Opera. I saw every opera. I would go so far as to say I saw 95% of the operas performed in London in the English National Opera and in Covent Garden for about 15 years.
I was interested in the order, the sequence that you put there. Did you put opera first and sex last? For a young man, that seems to be quite an unusual sequence of preferences.
No, I tell you what, I got her, my first wife I got through opera. We first met at an opera, and then I developed, my mother got me into cooking, and I came to a conclusion that food was the way to a woman's, we won't refer to anything else, food was a way to a woman. So opera and food led to sex.
Okay, so let's move on in the interests of the delicacies of YouTube. So you worked for the buses, on the buses, and you progressed up through the ranks, I believe.
18 years. 18 years.
18 years. So what happened after the buses? Well, first of all, why did you leave?
I got made redundant.
Okay.
Secondly, second question.
What did this lead to?
It led to me getting a job with the National Trust for England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And I got a great job in that organisation. The interesting thing in a way was that I got it while I was in the grip of a severe depression. Now, you know that Paul talks a lot. You know that Paul is enthusiastic, and some might say over-enthusiastic. Because I was depressed, I said very little. I spoke in a very calm and measured tone of voice. And I got a job, you know, remember, coming from the west of Ireland, I got a job with an organisation that I thought, probably fairly accurately in one sense, was an upper middle class English organisation. I had no interest in historic houses, none at all. They were the places where slavery, that funded slavery. They were the places where the aristocracy, you know, and I wasn't in favour of the aristocracy. I really and truly, if they'd asked me, do you like historic houses, Mr. Romani? I would have had to say, because I was brought up to speak the truth, person of integrity. I would have had to say, well, no, but things changed actually in a huge way. I came to have the most incredible respect for the skills, the craft skills of painters, plasterers. Every single item in a historic house was made by somebody who had served an apprenticeship and who was in a tradition of, you know, Goya. I carry on with all of the masters who were first of all apprentices. So I got that job. It was a pretty senior job as training and development manager. The reason it was the best job in the National Trust is that it happened at a time when National Trust was doing a huge transformation, bringing in property managers. That's another topic. General managers into properties. So they were going from from silo management with strong functional connections to general management. And I got the job of bringing in performance management into that organization. I was pretty hot on performance management from my previous life in London Transport, because I'd gone into personal skills, management development, training, and all that sort of stuff. But in the National Trust, I got a job, which meant that I had to go around the country, basically coaching and collaborating personnel managers, as they were called at the time, to become trainers.
Yeah.
And I was the lead trainer. So I got to leave on a Monday. I was living at that stage in the West Country. I got to leave on a Monday, let us say, to drive to, let's go up to Yorkshire. So I'm driving to Yorkshire on a Monday afternoon. And I'm not running the training course until Tuesday morning. And the training course is on Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday. It was one course. This was serious stuff. And so I got to drive up the country and stop off to just drop in for educational and other purposes into innumerable National Trust properties.
Yeah.
I had the whole afternoon free.
Yeah.
And nobody kept tabs on where I was. I had a company car. Yeah. I had a hotel to go to that night. I didn't even have to meet my co-trainer, but I did later that afternoon. Many's the time I left in the morning. And you can visit 4 National Trust properties on your way. In fact, I was ridiculous because I have a bit of a extreme personality at times. I decided I was going to visit every one of the National Trust properties in a year. Well, I didn't many, but I visited an awful lot of them. And I loved it. Oh my God, Moira, the people that you meet. The organization only had 3,000 employees with 30,000 volunteers. But the people you meet at the top of their game, I mean, just take the head of forestry. Not only was that person was of international standing in terms of forest management, but they were likely to be all sorts of other things, including a philosopher. That organization is riddled with talent. So I did that.
Can we move back a little bit? You were in London at a time when being Irish was maybe a disadvantage. Now, for those of the audience who are not aware of the history of the 70s and 80s, when the Irish Republican Army or the Provisional IRA were active in causing mayhem left, right and centre. I know from other friends who've been in England at that time, this can be a great disadvantage to be Irish in those circumstances. How did that affect you?
It was a huge advantage.
Really?
I mean, on the streets when the Harrods bomb went off. So just I was in places. The advantage for me was that English people haven't a clue how to place Irish people. They just don't know how educated they are or uneducated. The only thing they can go by, for the most part, is their accent. And I have a fairly, some sort of accent that they couldn't quite place. And they certainly didn't think I was a mountain man from Kerry or an islander from the Aran Islands or somewhere, or from Belfast or anywhere like that. So they couldn't place me. And also, I have a way of dealing with people who might express a negative view of any group. And I'd call it a Socratic or Platonic form of dialogue, which is if somebody were to say, Jesus, the Irish are so bloody ignorant. My natural response is, how ignorant are they, tell me? And then I engage the person in how ignorant are they. Have you ever met a more ignorant Irish person than that? Tell me, what would they like? At the time, they have had their prejudice addressed. Basically, I end up, I have to confess, taking the piss out of them. There's a wonderful joke, Moira, I gotta tell this much. This Irish guy from the west of Ireland went to work on a building site in the city of London where the charge hander, whatever they call him, was a Cockney. So he goes in and the guy says to him, right, mate, you want a job? Right. What's the difference between a joist and a girder? And Paddy looks at him and looks down at the ground. And the Cockney says, come on, mate, what's the difference, right? No fucking around here, right? What's the difference between a Cockney and a girder, or a whatever you call it, a girder and a joist? And the man looks and he says, right, mate, out you go. And Paddy says, well, Joyce wrote Ulysses and Goethe wrote Faust.
Yes, yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one. Okay, now you mentioned earlier the word depression, and I am aware that you have suffered from the black dog. Would you like to talk a little bit about this and how it's affected your life?
Yeah, and I can talk completely without any self-consciousness about it. First of all, let me start at the back end. I'm bipolar. It took me a long time to be told by anybody that I really was bipolar. I just thought I was somebody who got severe depressions. Didn't really connect it very much with the amount of exuberance and excitement that went on in my life before I crashed. I remember very vividly the first bout of severe depression I had, because I'd never experienced any depression growing up through my 20s. In the 80s, I had one brief weekend of what I would call depression, and I got into the 1990s. Now, it isn't that I had always good relationships. I had my own share of good relationships, of awful times in relationships, but I didn't get depressed. And to be fair, I think there was a type of cockiness or arrogance in me. But anyway, one day while during the process of being, hang on a second. Yeah, during the process of being made redundant from London Transport, I was suddenly hit by a bout of depression. Now, it lasted from, let's say, November until August. And when I say it lasted, every single bloody day was horrendous. I felt pain. I eventually, maybe it wasn't the very first bout of depression, but I eventually used to have a mantra that said, how will I tell people? I said, I wanted to wake up dead. It was awful. I shut myself in rooms, wouldn't talk to anybody, wouldn't answer the phone, wouldn't open the door, wouldn't go outside. And anytime I would go outside, I would be desperate to get back home and shut myself away again. But what I remember most about that very first time, I went through the process of selection and I thought, oh, bloody, I have to show my wife and 2 children that I am at least looking for a job, but I didn't want to get a job. I was being made redundant and I had no will to do anything. And I had lost all confidence that I'd be able to do anything. But I felt, geez, I better show willing. So I applied for 1 or 2 jobs. I got the job in the National Trust. And about shortly after, I recovered. No medication, nothing. They treated me fabulously. About 18 months later, I got another bout of depression. Just as severe, just as debilitating. And this time, for the first time, I took time off work. And I went into the doctor the first time. And I must have told the doctor about what I was feeling, and the doctor said, right, and he said, right, I'm going to put you off work for 2 weeks. And he said, are you all right if I put down a viral infection? I couldn't have given a damn what he put in the cert. But I actually didn't have any confidence about how I was going to be treated. So I said, fine. I went back 2 weeks later to get a renewal of the cert, and I couldn't have cared. He put depression, and I said, fine. I didn't care if my reputation was shredded by that. I'd never be trusted again to do a job, but I could never speak more highly of the National Trust. So, but from 1992, that period, right the way through till about 4 years ago, I've had major disruptions of my life for anything between 13 months and 5 months in which I have had the behaviors which I just described. I have lost chunks out of my life about every 18 months. And it means that actually I have very little memory of what happened, hypothetically, during the UK referendum on Brexit. I was depressed. I have no idea how that campaign really went.
Were you not being medicated during this period?
I was at that time. In fact, as soon as I started the second bout of depression, I took medication. However, for a good length of time, I self-medicated, meaning that I took the medication. I felt no effect of the medication on me. I started not taking it every single day when I should have. And when I got better, contrary to all the advice, I gave it up. Now, today, take medication every day and will for the rest of my life until somebody tells me, Paul, these tablets will lead to you having cancer and an early death. You have to stop them.
Yeah.
At which point I might retire to just drinking dry martinis every day. But the key thing is that, I was not, in that sense, a good patient, and I would never advise anybody. Well, I wouldn't advise anybody anything about their mental health. I came to the view that doctors should basically present somebody with a menu. So when you go into the doctor, you got depression, that the doctor should say, look, I got a menu of stuff here, and I don't know how you would react to any of them. I don't know what your taste is. The menu includes go for a daily walk. The menu includes buy a dog. The menu includes take a tablet. The menu includes go and have acupuncture. The menu includes go to all of the things. Which would you like to try first? So you try one for 2 weeks, and the doctor says, by the way, you come back in 2 weeks' time, I want to see you again. Instead, the usual habit was, here, take this medication, and no future appointment was booked. It was me to go back. And I mean, this is obviously a topic. I once set out to write a book about it, Moira. I have the draft.
I think you should, to be honest with you, because your experience sounds interesting enough to capture the interest of many people who might find themselves in a similar situation. I think the key point that comes out of what you said is the realization that the medication is actually the thing that is going to keep you on an even keel.
No. No? Medication, or me not self-medicating or cutting it down, has been how I have been for the last 4 years. I'm not suggesting that is proof of causality, and I'm also not suggesting that is the solution for anybody else. And I live every day, even though I take the medication, in full awareness of my vulnerability and the fragility of my mental health. The window or the curtain between being well and being unwell in of emotional health is about a filament which is easily breached in my personal knowledge. I collapsed many times very quickly. I was in France once. I was well. I did a stupid thing. I dived into water in a small lake. I was on it was with family, a painting course in France. I only painted on the course. But the key thing is I dived into the water with my glasses on. And I dived into this lake and I lost my glasses. The following day I started coming down with depression. You know, some people would say the messages you gave yourself, Paul, after losing your glasses were the reason, you know, you basically brought on your own depression. But probably I was too excited. I have to be very careful. Like people in a lot of organizations say, I'm very excited to tell you this. The last word I ever want to say I am is excited. I avoid it. I'm happy to say I'm delighted. I'm happy to say I'm very pleased, but I'm not happy to say I'm excited. I won something yesterday, and I would not say I'm excited to have won it.
Interesting. Is that because by saying that you're excited, that's going to take you up too high, and therefore if you go up too high you've got to come down, and you're going to come down too low?
What actually has made me go up too high in the past has been obsessive enthusiasm for one thing. And I went skiing for the first time in my life. I loved it. I was with my two sons. I loved it so much that I fell more frequently than anybody else in the group, and just was totally comfortable with falling over in the snow. But to make things kind of worse, you know, you have this après ski Glühwein. Now, I'm never one for drinking much alcohol, but I'd go down the slope in to have some Glühwein, wouldn't drink that much, but it was all still heady, talking very good day and all that. I went home, had a bit of food, and then, went home, went out to have food, and then went clubbing. And I was with two sons, and, you know, one of my sons would be, you know, an enthusiastic, at that stage, an enthusiastic teenager. Well, I outlasted him. I stayed up later than him. I went to bed at 4:30. I was up at 7:30. And I did that for a week. And I loved it. I kept it up every single night. I went back to Bath, where I was living, and I'd say within a week I had collapsed. And there's no question in my mind, there was a direct connection between the two. I had gone high.
Yeah.
You hear about people going high. There's a kind of famous story, and it is real, where somebody goes to make a best man speech at a wedding, and they start the speech, and 3 hours later they're still speaking, and they have to be taken off the stage. I don't mean 3 hours, but literally they can't stop.
Yeah.
Won't stop, and they have to be taken off the stage. They lose the complete run of themselves. I mean, there are all sorts of other things. People run down the street naked. People do all sorts of crazy things. An uncle of mine, we have one bipolar person in the entire extended family that I know of, who once jointly owned a bookshop with my father. But I believe that he used to give away money. Lovely, lovely man, but he needed to be cared for.
Okay.
So
we've done that subject to death, I think, Paul. So let's move on to something a little bit more interesting. In your later life, you've been caught by another bug. Would you like to talk a little bit about that?
Okay, well, in the summer of 1975, I went to North Cyprus on a holiday. And before I went, a really good friend of mine who I'd done quite a lot of, I suppose you'd call it management consultancy work with, said to me, Paul, what are you going to do on this holiday? And I said, thinking for a minute. I said, Barry, I'm going to write some poetry. Now, I was a guy who'd never written poetry since he was compelled to do it at school. A great lover of Dryden and Pope, I might say, when I was at school. And we used to pass the poems of the Earl of Rochester under the desk. Very bawdy stuff, highly recommended. It'll teach modern English, which contains lots of F words and other words, which definitely are even worse than the F word, were well used in the 17th century. But anyway, back to this point, I started writing poetry in 1995, Moira, and I am a poet. I've written poems consistently since then. I was the last person anyone would have thought would have written poetry. And I've done public performances, although they'd be more like readings. I don't do rap poetry. But I write. I have a huge collection of poetry. And one of my books is in the Kindle store. Irish Epic Poem in 33 cantos.
That was going to be my next question. Have you published any of your poetry?
I have, but the only one that's in, some were in small journals, really small journals, nothing like Poetry Ireland, small journals. Others were in a couple of anthologies. But the key one, and I've got a blog, so I published huge amounts of my blogs. Yeah. But the other side of it is that the one that was, this is going to make this sound very grand, the one that was launched at the Listowel Writers Festival in 2000 and, I was going to say 11 or 12 maybe, is Irish Epic Poem in 33 cantos. My mother bought all the hard copies or all the copies. But there are, of course, it's permanently available. It's 142 pages long. It's one canto less than Dante's Inferno, out of respect for Dante. And we'll see.
Okay, let's move on then. Poetry obviously has given you, well, the love of poetry has given you a love of language, and you in rather later life have started making use of that language in a slightly different way?
Yes, I will say. It all began in 2008 when I saw a guy I became very friendly with do the most awful hames of a job of doing a short presentation. I went to this meeting of Business Networking International, and Alan Cuthbert, wonderful guy, was awful. And I've told him this to his face. So he was dreadful. I went back about 2 years later to the same organization to a meeting, and he was fantastic. And I went up to him and I said afterwards, Alan, because I played golf with him, I said, Alan, what happened? You're a different guy. He said, I went to Toastmasters. I said, what? What's that? I didn't know what it was. I don't think I'd ever heard of it. Maybe I had heard of it. And I said, yeah. He said, if you ever want to come along, you can be my guest. Well, let's say that was 2011 even. I went to my first Toastmasters meeting in 2015, February 2015. And I only went because, well, I was interested in what the Toastmasters secret because I train people and in communication skills. And I have loads of opinions and experience. I've done innumerable training courses on how to do presentations. But most of them were, all of them were for business, and none of them were to train you to be a speaker and earn money as a speaker or anything. And I never trained anyone how to do impromptu speaking. But I did do business presentations, and I've done some weird ones, like including training people from the ad agency that did the Guinness adverts and having in the same room on the same course account managers and creatives. That's another story. I don't know how they ever hired me, and I'll never be good. And on the first day, I realized that actually I did have a role, because they were terribly good in one sense of putting information across and giving understanding, but they were absolutely hopeless at having a clear purpose in what they were aiming to do. And by clear purpose, I mean they obviously wanted to sell their company and get the contract, but they weren't able to tell people what they wanted them to do next. Like, do you want to phone me up? Do you want to send me an email? Do you want to go away and tell your friends or business about us? Which is the specific thing I want you to do tomorrow? And they had no idea about doing that. They'd never done it before. And if you don't do that, you ain't going to attract people as much to follow up, because you haven't told them how to do it. But anyway, I come back saying that I'd done loads of presentations. I heard about Toastmasters, hadn't a clue how it worked. I didn't go because of innumerable other things, not because I was against it. And then Shirley Gallagher, who, a good friend of mine, told me that she was in Corky's Toastmasters and said, do you want to come along? And I said, Shirley, look, I've never been. Yeah, I will come along. I went along and I joined that night. I leave out all the description of why. I joined Toastmasters because of the Toastmasters promise. Yeah. I was looking at the application form and I turned it round on the back and I saw this thing I'd never seen before and nobody had mentioned at the meeting, the 10-point promise. And I went, oh my God. Now, I owned a branding company at the time. And as far as I was concerned, this was a manifesto. I'd written manifestos, drafted them for other people, including one for my own company. But here was the Toastmasters manifesto. This was the promise. That's what a manifesto is, in my opinion. And I went, wow, this organization has really got itself sorted out. Never mind the people who are in this particular room. This organization, global organization. And I said, I want to be in it, you know. And I also was totally struck by how friendly and generous and kind that the people were that I met. So I joined that night. And, well, I'm intent on, you know, I'll take the Toastmasters promise into the coffin with me. I'm aiming to be the oldest world champion, a coach, mentor, ever in the history of Toastmasters.
So you have some competition there, because we both know of a certain lady in London who is well into her 80s, who is undoubtedly one of the most active Toastmasters in the whole world.
I have an advantage over her. If things continue on the kind of average situation, I will live longer than her. Or else I'll be living after she's gone. So I'll have the advantage. You know how in a speech contest in Toastmasters, no one wants to be first? You're sitting there in you're the competitor.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I have to say I was last night, and had an unfair advantage, we'll say. So I'll have seen how this incredible woman with the best diction I've ever come across in Toastmasters, how this incredible woman does it. And anyway, I'm on a vegan macrobiotic diet, and I've cut down every vice in order to be the oldest. So
I see.
Better say that's a joke.
Well, you mentioned earlier that you had won something yesterday. Well, I can tell you folks that Paul won at the International Speech Contest at our club that we're both members of, called the Firebirds Collective, which is an online advanced Toastmasters club. And I regret to say that Paul was competing against myself, and I didn't win.
But the good things, listeners, is that there's no hard feelings between us.
Absolutely not. One of the interesting things that Toastmasters has taught me is that winning is not the point. The point is actually getting up, getting the stage time, enjoying yourself, pitting yourself against others, yes, But that is not the most important thing. The most important thing is actually the doing of it. And each time you do it, you learn something about yourself. And maybe that speech that I did last night, I'm going to do again on Tuesday this week. And in a couple of weeks' time as well. And hopefully it'll be that much better.
And by the way, Toastmasters is like golf, you see. I've played golf for a long time. And you go out on the golf course, at least if you're me, you go out on the golf course. And who are you playing against? Yourself.
Yes.
If you play your best round, or even if you play well, you're delighted if somebody beats you because they've played even better. Yeah. And if you've been playing with them, you're even more fortunate because you've seen some of their shots. So all I wanted to do last night was do justice to my own purpose. It may not be the best speech I was ever going to do, but I had an absolutely big, strong intention of what influence I wanted to have by making the speech. And I was terribly satisfied with it from that point of view. And if Moira had beaten the pants off me, I would have cheered her. And I would have, if there was a second stage in the contest, and truthfully, I don't know if there really is, I don't know whether I'll ever have to make that speech again, but I will be making it again. Yeah. But I would have backed her the whole way and cheered her on.
And that is one of the really great things about Toastmasters. One of the things that I've learnt in my 6 years in Toastmasters is that it is a very cooperative venture. You go in there to learn yourself how to speak, how to learn to develop yourself as a person, but you end up being totally cooperative. You're giving back, you're giving yourself back to others at the same time as you grow yourself.
Yeah, so many people say this actually. They say that they went in to learn how to speak and sort of unconsciously they took on this thing about leadership, and one of the things you have to do about as a leader is you have to support other people.
Yes.
And you know, every time you turn up at a Toastmasters meeting, that's the first act of genuine leadership. When you turn up, you help somebody else to, in some way, even if you do nothing other than sit in the audience and don't even open your mouth.
Yeah.
Your presence is a sign of support and interest, etc. So, and that's such a fundamental thing for me. I've never had repeated opportunity. You know, well, it used to be every fortnight. It's now nearly every day, I have to admit, during the pandemic. I turn up at so many meetings. But yeah, Maura, I totally agree with you.
Well, Paul, that's been a very, very interesting conversation. I've enjoyed our little time together, and I'd like to say thank you for giving me your time and for sharing so much of your life with my audience. And I hope that the audience enjoys it as much as I did. So we'll say goodbye and thank you.
Can I have the last word?
You may indeed.
I don't think I've ever had a more enjoyable interview by anybody ever. And I've done a few long ones as well. But none have been more enjoyable than this. None have given me a chance to cover quite so much of my life. Thank you very, very much.
It's been my pleasure. I hope that you will join me again for my next conversation, and I'll see you then. Bye for now.